This video is a comparison of Daniel 3 and Revelation 13. This presentation is a companion video to the audio radio program of Daniel 3. Please listen to that program to fully understand what you're about to see. If you're viewing this video on YouTube, you will find that radio broadcast at the following website, www.yourfirmfoundation.org, under the menu icon of radio broadcasts, and it will be listed as Daniel chapter 3. Many of the ancient stories found in the Old Testament scriptures are actually blueprints of future events. These stories are a handbook to guide us in these last days. The stories from the book of Daniel are to prepare us for the future scenarios that will occur again at the end of time. God wants us to have the faith, endurance, and courage in order to stand for Him in these last days. So the prophet Daniel pulls back the curtain of time and allows us, with the stories, to really peer into the future for last day events. In Daniel chapter 2, the king of Babylon has a dream. When Daniel asks God for help, God gives Daniel the meaning of the dream. Daniel explains the dream to King Nebuchadnezzar. And he says, "You are this head of gold, O king. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours." Well, Nebuchadnezzar, this is what he sees in the dream: the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the thighs of brass, the legs of iron, the feet part of iron and part of clay. And then Daniel explains the meaning. The head of gold represented Babylon, chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persia, thighs of brass, the Greek Empire, legs of iron, the Roman Empire, feet of iron and clay, the divided Europe after the fall of the Empire of Rome. But he told Nebuchadnezzar, "You are that head of gold." Well, as Nebuchadnezzar thought about it, he didn't like the idea of the fact that his kingdom was not going to last forever. So he pondered, what am I going to do? I want to make a statue all of gold. Well, then something very interesting happened. In December of 594 BC, there was a mutiny of many in Nebuchadnezzar's military, which was squashed by him and may have precipitated the erection of the golden image that year in order to guarantee loyalty to the throne. And so he called everyone in his kingdom. Everybody that was somebody, everybody that was anybody, had to come and worship the golden image that he erected on the very same plain where the Tower of Babel once stood. However, when he commanded worship, the three Hebrew worthies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to obey his command because they wanted to keep God's commandments. They were brought before the king, and they told the king that they would not worship his golden image. Well, he had them cast into the fiery furnace. But then he sees a fourth person walking in the fiery furnace that he says looks like the Son of God. And he asked the three Hebrews to come back out of the fiery furnace. When they came out, they had no hurt on them, and they didn't smell like smoke. The only thing that had been burned up were the ropes that bound them. In the books of Daniel and the Revelation, there are striking similarities that reveal that the book of Revelation is actually an unfolding or a revealing of the book of Daniel. In fact, the similarities are so significant between Daniel chapter 3 and Revelation chapter 13 as to give the distinct impression that God is telling us that Daniel 3 will happen again in the future. Indeed, Revelation 13 is a mirror image of Daniel 3, giving us a handbook of prophetic guidelines of future events. So let's go now to Daniel chapter 3. It says there in verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Now, I won't be reading all the text, but I have highlighted the text in red here so that you can understand where I'm going and what I want to mark. The king here represented a world government. Even God had told the king of Babylon that he was the ruler of the then-known world in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 4. So in Daniel 3, we have a king or worldwide power. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, and in chapter 2, he set this dedication of the image up for everyone to worship. The word image here is used 11 times in Daniel chapter 3. In this case, the image was a false image of the real image of Daniel 2. Not the image God had revealed, but a man-made image, a false one. So we have an image in Daniel chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and the breadth was 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, 60 by 6. Now the image was not flat. It's not a two-dimensional, it's a three-dimensional image. So we believe that the actual dimensions were 60 by 6 by 6, or 666, which was a very significant number to the Babylonians. In the pagan system of Babylonian worship, there was a trio of gods worshipped basically as a false trinity. Anu was regarded as the father and first of all Babylonian gods. He dwelt in the highest heavenly regions and wore a tiara on his head. His mystical number was 60. So we have a mystical number in Daniel 3. In Daniel 3, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes and the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together into the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Here we have a worldwide or universal decree. The king in the then known world called the representatives from all over his empire, from all over his world, to gather for the dedication of this image. So you have a universal decree. Then a herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of this great band, the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. So the real issue here is worship, a world ruler, a universal decree, a command to worship. The word worship is also used 11 times in Daniel chapter 3. So the issue is worship. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So they were commanded at the sound of this great band to fall down and worship. So there's a death penalty, a law requiring worship, death for noncompliance. And then in verse 7, Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of this great band, they fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. There is an interesting combination here of civil and religious powers, combined forces. The king is the civil power, the head of state. He commands worship, which is a religious power. The church and the state combine the power of the state to command worship. You see, in this case, as it was in many Old Testament empires, the king or the pharaoh or the head of state was not only the head of state in charge of civil authority, but he was also the high priest. He was in charge of religious authority. So there was a combination of civil and religious powers here in Daniel chapter 3. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You have made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of this great band should fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso does not fall down and worship, he should be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Well, there were many Jews present at the dedication of this image, not just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The Jewish heads of state that Nebuchadnezzar had placed on the throne of Israel were present, but only Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood faithful to God. So there were many that were unfaithful. So, accused by the worldly, many other of God's people present at this dedication became unfaithful to the commandments of God and bowed low. To obey the state was to disobey God. To obey God was to disobey the state. Following your convictions was treated as treason. So we have many unfaithful. Now then, in these verses, we again, the same verses that we read about certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, have not regarded thee. Now these are the Chaldeans that are speaking here. Then verse 13 says, Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, and he commanded them to be brought before him. In verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, or nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, if ye be ready, that at what time you hear this big band, that you fall down and worship, well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? So there was a time of trouble. Decision time among the faithful. Actually, as we shall see, the three Hebrews had long before made their decisions to only follow God and keep his commandments. So a time of trouble in Daniel 3. Now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they answered the king, very respectfully, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer thee in this matter. That phrase means we're not hesitant, we're not full of care, we're not afraid to answer you in this matter. He says, we will not worship your gods. And if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So you have the faithful few. In Matthew chapter 7, it says, Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, their garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. But then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fiery furnace? They answered and said, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. So you have this miraculous deliverance. The flames that destroyed the wicked released the bonds holding the righteous. So you have here not only the faithful few, but a miraculous deliverance. Then it says, the princes, the governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. So the wicked behold the deliverance of the righteous in this situation. And so you have these 12 basic points in Daniel 3, a king or worldwide power, an image, a mystical number, a universal decree, the issue is worship, there's a death penalty, the church and state are combined, many are unfaithful, there's a time of trouble, there's a faithful few, but miraculous deliverance to those faithful few, and the wicked actually behold the miracle. Now, let's move to that incredible book of Revelation, which is a revealing of future events. Revelation 13 and the mark of the beast. We will now compare the details of Daniel 3 with Revelation 13. As we compare the things that we saw in Daniel with Revelation 13, text or verses will not be in any particular order, but will be shown in the order of events from Daniel chapter 3. This is just the most amazing thing, friends. In Daniel 3, you have these 12 events. Now we're in Revelation chapter 13, verse 3. It says, All the world wondered after the beast, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and power was given to him over kindreds, tongues, and nations. and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him. Verse 16, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell. And so you have a king, or you have at least a worldwide power that is able to command in the whole world. Now, in verse 14, it talks about an image, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell upon the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image, and that image of the beast should both speak, and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So you have an image here. In verse 18 it says, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So you have a mystical number. And verse 12, and he causeth the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, saying to them that dwell upon the earth that they should make an image to the beast. Notice here it says, saying to them that dwell on the whole earth. Cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, and he causeth all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And so you have a universal decree, completely worldwide. And they worshiped the dragon. And then verse 8 says, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him. Verse 12, and causes them that dwell to worship the first beast. Verse 15, as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So you have the issue of worship. Again, the word worship is used over and over again in Revelation 13, and it is the theme of Revelation 13. Who will you worship? Verse 15 says, he caused that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So you have a death penalty. And he had 2 horns like a lamb. He causeth the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Horns represent a civil government. You can see that in Daniel chapter 2, in Daniel chapter 7, and in chapter 8. No church has authority to command the peoples of the earth to worship, so the church and the state will have to work together to pass religious laws of worship in these last days. So you have a civil and religious powers, or church and state combined, in the future persecution that is coming. Many will be unfaithful, just like in Daniel 3. Now, there's no specific statement in these passages that say anything about a person's faithfulness. This is just based on a knowledge of Bible teachings, human nature, and a previous knowledge of Bible history. Now, the Bible does say in 1 Timothy 4:1, the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. So you have many unfaithful. The crisis, or what caused the crisis, is not mentioned in Revelation 13. Only the reaction to some world crisis. But we do know that there is trouble on the earth, and many will refuse to worship or receive the mark of the beast, so that many will either be in prison or die. Jesus talks about a time of trouble such as never was in Matthew 24:21. So you have a time of trouble for the righteous, those who will not bow. Again, no mention is made of the outcome of the reign of terror, but we do know that the book of Revelation was written so that God's people could be forewarned of coming events and be prepared. There will be those who choose to be faithful to God and His commandments. So you do have the faithful few. Later chapters in Revelation reveal that Jesus will personally intervene to save His people when He comes a second time. You must see chapters 15 to 20 of Revelation. So you have a miraculous deliverance. But not only that, God comes to deliver His people from the wicked, and the wicked actually see what is happening. So there's miraculous deliverance, and the wicked behold the miracle at the second coming of Jesus. So there are those passages in Scripture that reveal that the wicked will see the salvation of God for his people. You can look for yourself in Psalm 91, verses 7 and 8, and Revelation 6, verses 14 to 17. So you have these 12 events occurring in Daniel 3 and the identical 12 events occurring in Revelation 13. You can actually put these together, collate them into one. You have a king or worldwide power in both, an image, a mystical number, a universal decree, and the issue is worship. There's a death penalty. There's civil and religious powers combined. Church and state are united. Many are unfaithful. There is a time of trouble. However, there are the faithful few, and there's a miraculous deliverance which the wicked will behold. Friends, Jesus is coming soon, and in this prophecy of Daniel, which he told us of the world empires that were coming. And you know, friends, we are living at the time of the very end of these toes in this image. We're living in the last days. At the very end of time, Jesus is coming soon. The stories of Daniel help us to get ready for that miraculous event and to stand firm for his truths. God bless you as you continue to study his word. This is your firm foundation, calling us to a deeper study of his word.